Hello everyone, welcome to Sic Semper Tyrannis News. I'm your host, Mark Matheny. For what it's worth right now, we know that there are many people out there who are going to be celebrating Halloween tonight. Right now, there's probably people out walking around, young kids with their parents, and they are knocking on doors and they are asking for special treats, for candy, things of this nature. And so tonight, I really want to talk about the origins of Halloween. Because each year at this season, on the last day of the Roman month of October, you have millions of people who enjoy a night of what they think is fun and games, parties, dressing up in costumes. And these costumes often represent demons and devils, witches. A lot of those are a part of that Halloween tradition. And trick or treat is usually what they say when they come and knock on the door, saying that you either give them candy or you get a prank. And of course, everybody says, well, it's just for fun, right? They say it's just for fun. But the celebration of Halloween is really an established custom in the United States, primarily, and in the British Commonwealth and other Scandinavian countries, a lot of the European countries primarily. But if you are a believer in the Holy One, then what does Halloween possibly have to do with you? So if you go back in the earliest accounts of the Bible, and we look at Abraham, our father, he was instructed by Yahweh to remove himself from his established clan and to go to a place where the Holy One instructed him to go. In the book of Genesis, chapter 12, verse 1 through 4, it says, "And now Yahweh said to Abram, Get out of your country and from your kindred and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram departed as Yahweh had spoken to him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And later on his name became changed to Abraham because he obeyed Yahweh, because he walked with Yahweh, and he taught his children to walk with Almighty Yahweh. And in the time of Abraham, just like it is now, there were a lot of denominations and beliefs, but there were only a few people who actually followed Almighty Yahweh at that time. And at that time, those few were Abraham's family. And the worship of the heathen people, they were mostly worshiping the sun, the moon, the stars, demons, gods, different things. But think about why Almighty Yahweh told Abraham to leave his land, the land of Ur, which is a part of Mesopotamia. It's where the ancestors of Abraham lived, and his ancestors worshipped idols. And Yahweh knew Abraham would have to come out from under the influence of his ancestors and their worship in order to grow and worship Yahweh only. And this is going to lead into the origin of Halloween, but you got to understand the beginnings. And I want to show you in the Encyclopedia Judaica, in volume 5 and page 1521, it tells us this: demons and demonology. A demon is an evil spirit or a devil in the ordinary English usage of the term. This definition, however, is only approximate. In polytheistic religions, the line between gods and demons is a shifting one. There are both good demons and gods who do evil. In monotheistic systems, evil spirits may be accepted as servants of the one God, so that demonology is bound up with angelology and theology proper, where they may be elevated to the rank of opponents of God, in which case their status as diabolic powers differs from that of the demons in polytheism. Moreover, in none of the languages of the ancient Near East, including Hebrew, is there any one general term equivalent to the English word demon. In general, the notion of a demon in the ancient Near East was of a being less powerful than a god and less endowed with individuality. Whereas the great gods are accorded regular public worship, demons were not. They're dealt with in the magic rites in individual cases of human suffering, which is their particular sphere. This is from Encyclopedia Judaica. But in the same volume of the Encyclopedia Judaica, on pages 1521 to 1522, it shows us that the worship of the ancient Near East was also the pacification of these gods and demons. It goes on to say, demonology in the ancient Near East. Defense against evil spirits was a concern in Mesopotamia from the earliest times. In general, features Canaanite demonology probably resembled that of Mesopotamia, to judge from the rather meager evidence preserved. In a mythological text from the Ugarit, the father of the gods, El, is frightened almost to death by a demon having two horns and a tail, like the devil in later representations. Now, in Collier's Encyclopedia in volume 8, page 96, it shows that the intervention of spirits, gods, and demons was made possible by the means of magic. Magical influence. It says, the intervention of spirits in nature and human affairs is made possible according to demonology by means of magic. Thus, magic is employed by primitive peoples to prevent drought, to produce rain, and to ward off disease or famine. By means of propitiation and spells, evil spirits may be diverted from their malevolent designs or pursuits. Among some primitive tribes, the path along which it is believed a demon will approach is barricaded with thorns, brushwood, odors, fire, and other obstacles. Epileptic fits and other kinds of seizures are occasions for the medicine man to apply the rites of exorcism. To the primitive tribesmen, magic is the only available source of power whereby the attacks of demons may be averted or withstood. Now, the same page of this source tells us about some of the types of spirits that were influenced by the magic. It says types of spirits. Among the spirits most familiar to students of demonology are the spirits of vegetation, water spirits, domestic spirits, ancestral spirits, and dream demons. Ancestral spirits. Belief in ancestral spirits and the practice of ancestral worship is widely prevalent. In its cruder forms, the phase of demonology stresses the malignancy of the souls of suicides, of those who die by death and violence, and of women who died in childbirth. demons of the unburied are feared more than ordinary ghosts. The worship of ancestral spirits, either as gods or as surviving souls of departed members of the family, reflects belief in immortality and the almost universal belief that death does not dissolve an individual's relation to the group. The post-mortal status of the individual corresponds to that during his mortal existence. For this reason, spirits of the departed are accorded with respect, love, or fear shown to them during their earthly estate. Although all dead are held in awe, those who lived evil lives or died by violence are dreaded, because in the former instance they are freer to work harm, and in the latter instance they may be intent upon revenge. It follows that the living must safeguard themselves against the dangerous spirits or demons. Hence, exorcisms and charms are superlatively important wherever this form of demonology prevails. So, in later accounts of history, in the scripture, you had the children of Israel who sojourned into the land of Egypt, and they remained there for 430 years before they were redeemed by Yahweh through Moshe, through Moses. And so you had heathen worship in Egypt, and basically it was directed at the same gods in the same manner, and the same customs that Abraham had witnessed in the land of Ur, the Chaldees. And you have the children of Israel who were delivered out of the land, and that land was defiled by the worship of every god and demon. So you had these chosen people who were taught by Moshe in the wilderness, and he wasn't ignorant of the enticement of pagan Baal worship. But Moshe knew that the only way really that Yahweh wanted to be worshipped was his way. And so Moses, instructed by Yahweh, told the children of Israel in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 9 through 12 this. He said, and listen, "When you come into the land Yahweh your Father is giving you, do not learn to follow the abominable ways of the nations. Let there not be found among you one who sacrifices his son or his daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, casts spells, or who consults with familiar spirits, or a wizard or a necromancer. Anyone who practices these is abominable to Yahweh. And because of these abominable practices, it says Yahweh your mighty one is driving you out of the nation in front of you." But let's look back into the Encyclopedia Judaica, volume 5, on page 15, 22, and 23. It tells us this: Demonology in the Bible. Israel's official religion contrasts sharply with the contemporary polytheisms in the role assigned to demons, which in the Bible is practically nil. Magic was prohibited among the Israelites from very early times, for already the oldest collection of laws, the Book of the Covenant, contains the command, "You shall not tolerate a sorceress." And that's in Exodus and in Deuteronomy. And Saul put the practitioners of necromancy out of the land in 1 Samuel. Since much of the pagan magic was protective, intended to keep demons away or to expel them, obviously Israel's religion aimed at a very radical extirpation of traffic with demons. And so the Holy Scriptures say basically that because of all the abominations listed, the Almighty was going to drive the heathen nations out from before the children of Israel. The law, the statutes, the judgments. The Holy One didn't give those to the children of Israel so they would ignore them. Moses wasn't ignorant of the worship either of the pagan nations. He was learned in all the ways of the Egyptians. And so the worship of these demons basically were practices of appeasing them. Basically, the heathen felt that these gods had to be fed during the licentious feasts of lusts and sexual excesses. And they had to be fed with the lives of the worshippers' own children even. And Moses knew, because Yahweh had instructed him, that nobody could serve Yahweh and serve idols and gods and demons at the same time, and if they were to try, they would perish. If you go into Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 24 through 26, it says this: "For Yahweh, your Elohim, is a consuming fire, a jealous heavenly Father, and is provoked by any idol. When you beget children and grandchildren, and have grown old in the land, and if you then become corrupt and make any kind of god, doing evil in the sight of Yahweh your mighty one, and provoking him to anger, then I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day, that you will soon utterly perish from the land which you are crossing the Jordan to possess. You will not prolong your days in it, but you will utterly be destroyed." And so the only real way of worship that Yahweh accepts is the way Yahweh instructed. But by the deception of Satan, basically, some of the children of Israel started to forsake Yahweh and started to worship Baal Peor. Baal Peor means Lord of the Opening. If you go to Numbers chapter 25, verse 1 through 5, it says this: "While Israel was staying in Shittim," meaning the acacia grove, "the people began to commit sexual immorality with Moabite women. They invited them to sacrifice their children to the gods, and the people went and bowed down in front of their gods. And so Israel joined in worshiping Baal Peor, the Lord of the Opening. And Yahweh's anger burned against them. And Yahweh said to Moshe, 'Take all the leaders of the people and kill the offenders. Hang them out in broad daylight in front of Yahweh, so that Yahweh's fierce anger may turn away from Israel.' So Moshe said to the judges of Israel, 'Every one of you are to kill his men who are joined in the worship of Baal Peor, the Lord of the Opening.'" And it had to do with phallic sex worship. And in the book of Psalm, chapter 106, verse 28, it says, "They yoked themselves to Baal Peor and ate the sacrifices offered to the dead." And that's what I want to talk about, because Halloween really, that connection, the connection to sacrificing to the dead. And the ancient Babylonians had a god named Samas. You can find it in the Encyclopedia Judaica, Volume 5, page 1020. It says, and listen, "For example, before going out to battle, the Babylonian king Casdilius, the Assyrian king, accuses the latter of betrayal and violation of the treaty between them. And as proof, he reads the treaty in a loud voice before the god Samas, S-A-M-A-S. And so, in the Encyclopedia Judaica, Volume 14, on page 719, it says, Samael, from the Amoraic period onward, the major name of Satan in Judaism, Samael, S-A-M-A-E-L. And so, according to this Jewish legend, it says that Samael is the angel of death, and he's the head of the devils. And the Greek rendering of the word is Samain, Samane, Samain. And here's what it says in the Encyclopedia Judaica about that. It says, it includes the name, although not the most important It includes the name, although not in the most important place, in the list of the leaders of the angels who rebelled against God. The Greek versions of the lost Hebraic text contain some forms of Samhain or Samiel, Semiel. And in the Standard Encyclopedia of Folklore, Mythology, and Legend, it says this about Samhain. It says Samhain, and it's pronounced Sovan or Sowan. It's the festival, listen closely, the festival of the beginning of winter, celebrated on or about November 1st in Ireland and Gaelic Scotland, in a very great antiquity. And the word means the end of summer. One of the oldest Irish saga states that the barrows where the fairies dwelt were open about Samhain, and in Scotland a demon who stole babies at this time was called a Samhainach. Another old saga relates that for 3 days before and 3 days after November 1st, the warriors of Ulster assembled for eating, drinking, and boasting of men they had killed, producing the tips of their tongues as evidence. And according to Keating, in heathen times, the Druids of Ireland assembled to sacrifice to the gods and burn their victims on Samhain Eve or Samain Eve. All the other fires were to be extinguished, to be rekindled only from that fire. And this custom still lingers on without the sacrifices in parts of Ireland and Scotland. The peat fires are extinguished in the cottages on Halloween and are relighted from the bonfires which burn on the hilltops. And in the Highlands, families used to circumambulate the fields sunwise, holding fir torches. At Waterford, groups of country lads, headed by hornblowers, visited the farmer's house and collected pence and provisions for the ensuing celebration. In parts of County Cork, the procession was led by a man called the White Mare, wearing a white robe and the semblance of a horse's head, while in other parts the lads dressed as mummers and professed to be the messengers of Muck Ola, a boar slain by one of the Geraldines. Until about 1850, and the inhabitants of the Isle of Lewis used to assemble on the same night, bringing the provisions, ale and provisions, repeat a paternoster, though mostly Protestants did this, it says, and walked down to the sea. One of them waded in the water and poured a cup of ale and cried out, "Shoni, I give this cup of ale to you, hoping that you'll be so kind as to send us plenty of seaware and enrich our ground for the coming year." The group then went into a church, stood silent for a while, and then adjourned to the fields for drinking, dancing, and singing. MacCulloch, in 1911, mentioned the license permitted to youths on Samhain Eve or Samain Eve in the quietest townships of the West Highlands. Vallancey, in the 18th century, recorded that Irish maidens observed the festival by sowing hemp seed and believed that if they looked back they would see the apparition of their future spouse, or they would hang a smock before the cottage fire, convinced that his apparition would come down the chimney and turn the smock over. So you have Samhain or Samhain, which is a Druidic assembly on the night of October 31st. And they would sacrifice to their gods and burn their victims. If you go to the Standard Encyclopedia of Folklore, Mythology, and Legend, Volume A, page 263, it tells us about this. And the sacrifices of the dead. Crom Cruach is a huge idol which stood on the plain of Mag Sleacht, the plain of adoration or prostration, in County Cavan in Ulster, near the present village of Ballymagara, also called the Rig Idal Harayan, the king idol of Ireland. It says around him were 12 idols made of stone, but he was made of gold. And to him the early Irish sacrificed 1/3 of their children on November 1st on Samhain, or Samhain, in return for milk and corn and good weather, which ensured the fertility of cattle and crops. The idol and the sacrifices are mentioned in the 6th century in Dinencius in the book of Leinster. Crom Cruach was held in horror for his terrible exactions. It was dangerous even to worship him, for the worshippers themselves often perished in the act of worship. A pre-Christian king named Tigranes is said to have introduced the worship of Crom Cruach to Ireland and to have been destroyed himself with 3/4 of his people one Samhain night during the prostrations. The 12 lesser idols encircling the golden image have led to the assumption that Crom Cruach was a solar deity. Certainly he was a fertility god, but he has not been identified with any ancient Irish god. Dagda, in his agricultural aspect, has been suggested for this role, but no identity can be substantiated. The Dinencius names the idol Crom Cruach, meaning the bloody crescent or the bloody bent one. It is referred to as Sen Cruach, the bloody head, in the tripartite life of Patrick. Legend also says that Patrick cursed and destroyed it. The Dinencius story tells how Patrick preached to the people on Mag Sleacht against the burning of milk cows and their firstborn progeny. Crom Dub's Sunday. In Irish folklore, the first Sunday in August, anniversary of the destruction of the famous idol known as Crom Dub, on this date flowers were still offered in his place on Mount Callan in County Clare as late as the mid-19th century. For this reason, the day is also called Garland Sunday. The flower offerings were reminiscent of a time when more bloody sacrifices were prepared. And in the Dictionary of Folklore and Mythology and Symbols, part 1 of it, on page 200 and 201, it talks about Beltane. It says it's an ancient Celtic festival, marking the opening of summer and honoring the sun. One of the quarter days, celebrated on May 1st of the old calendar with bonfires and other rites. Druids drove cattle between two need fires, to which miraculous virtues were ascribed to prevent the murrain. Dances were performed, and the day was filled with gaiety, which culminated in the sacrifice by fire of a man representing the Oak King, paralleling the fire cleansing ceremonies of ancient Babylonians. So, Beltane is the Druidic assembly, basically, and it marks the opening of summer, and it's marked by human sacrifice. So we just read this excerpt, and it openly admits that it's that the pagan Celtic worship parallels the ancient fire cleansing ceremonies of ancient Babylon from where it came. So you can see how it goes back and leads back to Babylon. But if we continue on reading, it says, in Celtic legendary history, Partholon and his people arrived in Ireland on a Beltane or May Day. And so it mentions Parthia, and that designates basically the great empire of the Parthians that built up after conquering ancient Babylon. Because the Babylonians had brought out the worship of Bel to the Celts. Bel was Baal, and they did that complete with the worship of the dead and of human sacrifices. And the Parthians were basically the Persians. You had the Babylon, the Medo-Persians, then Greece and Rome, and so on. But in the Dictionary of Non-Christian Religions, on page 42, it says this of Bel: the god of the earth in Babylonian religion, whose worship was centered at Nippur. With the growth of the cult of Marduk, tutelary god of Babylon, he came to be identified with Bel, or as the Lord, it says, over all. The name means the same as Baal, the Lord. Now, the apocryphal book of Bel and the dragon, or snake, says that Cyrus the Persian worshipped the Babylonian idol called Bel, but Daniel overthrew it and a serpent, which was also worshipped. And then it goes on in the encyclopedia to say Belanos, the sun god of Celtic mythology, from Belos, meaning brightness. His worship was widespread in Gaul and perhaps in Britain too, and the Romans identified him with Apollo. Images had been found of a nameless god who has a wheel, often a symbol of the sun, and this may be Belanos. Geoffrey of Monmouth, in his history, said that the ashes of Belanos were preserved at Billingsgate in London, so named after him. And then you have the same dictionary on page 242 says this about Samhain, or Samhain. It's the ancient Celtic festival held at the end of October and the beginning of November. In Ireland, it is celebrated on the shores of lakes. Samhain or Samhain marked the beginning of winter, as Beltane marked the onset of summer. Samhain meant summer end, and bonfires were lit to strengthen the powers of the waning sun. These were perpetuated in the bonfires of November 5th, still popular in Britain. In the Christian calendar, Samhain was merged into All Saints' Day on November 1st. Now, note that. That's very important. All Saints' Day. So, the Dictionary of Folklore, Mythology, and Symbols on page 1393 say this about Samhain, or Samhain. Literally, the summer's end. Celtic winter solstice festival celebrated about November 1st. The entrance to burial caves were left open to allow the spirits to come out for an airing. The Oicht Shamna omen for the future were extracted from the fairies. The Foamers first oppressed the people of Nemed with their terrible tax on this day, and on it the Mag Tured battles were fought. Thus, the day on which the winter giants expelled the fertility gods. On the Isle of Man, called Samhain, in Wales, called Nos Galan Gaelf, Night of the Winter Calends. It corresponds to Halloween. Compare Beltane. Samhainach. Goblins which come out on Samhain in Scotland correspond to Halloween. This is the Dictionary of Folklore, Mythology, and Symbols. Now, it mentions Halloween. So let's look at that. The Yearbook of English Festivals by Dorothy Gladys Spicer says this on page 153 through 157. And on it's showing you the ancient meanings of Halloween, All Saints' Day, and All Souls' Day. All of these are a part of these ancient sacrifices of the dead. So here's what it says. All Hallows Eve, October 31st. On All Hallows Eve, or All Hallow Ian, with its traditions of witches, ghosts, hobgoblins, and sprites, its games and its incantations, still is a gay time for pranks and parties in many North Country homes. Fun-loving Americans have borrowed from their British ancestors many Halloween games, such as apple bobbing, nut roasting, and tossing of apple parings. Transplanted to New World soil, the old practices have become revitalized and currently are observed with more enthusiasm than in the country of their birth. To ancient Druids, the end of October commemorated the festival of the waning year, when the sun began his downward course and ripened grain was garnered from the fields. Samhain, or the summer's end, as this festival to the dying sun was called, was celebrated with human sacrifice, augury, and prayer. For at this season spirits walked, and evil had power over the souls of men. Not until the 4th century did the pagan vigil for the God of Light give way to All Hallows, the Mass for Christian saints. And not until the 10th did the Druids' death feast become All Souls' Day of prayer for souls that had entered their rest. Cakes for the dead were substituted for human sacrifices, fortune-telling for heathen augury, and lighted candles for the old Baal fires. So you can start to see the transformation. Fortune-telling is what augury is. If you look it up, augury means divination, the art or practice of foretelling events by signs or omens, that which forebodes from that which is a prediction, is drawn, or an omen or a portent, a formal ceremony conducted by an augur. An augur means to guess or conjecture by signs or omens, to prognosticate, to predict or foretell, to be an omen. So gradually, the dictionary goes on to say, the last night of October, first a Druid feast and then a Christian holy day, emerged as a night of gaiety when young people played games and read fortunes for simple objects, from simple objects such as apples and cabbage or nuts. And indeed, nuts became such a favorite means of divination that All Halloween was known as Nutcrack Night. Boys and girls placed nuts side by side in the dying embers. If the nuts flew apart, quarrels and disaster were sure to follow. But if they burned brightly side by side, a peaceful married life was foretold. Next to nuts, apples featured in all Halloween divinations. Apple bobbing is still a popular northern country tradition in rural America. It says even pips and parings come in for their share of attention. This old rhyme accompanies the swinging of pairing to learn the loved one's initials. And it has a poem. It says, I pair this pippin round and round again, my sweetheart's name to flourish on the plain. I fling the unbroken pairing o'er my head, my sweetheart's letter on the ground to read. And then it goes on to say, though many old Halloween customs have disappeared, survivals of All Souls Day, November 2nd, as will be seen, is still exist in many communities. Soulers, not very unlike American Halloween mummers, still make village rounds and beg for soul cakes instead of something for Halloween. And then it goes on and talks about All Saints or All Souls Day, November 1st and 2nd. It says the early English church called All Saints the feast to commemorate all the saints. All Hallows E'en, or All Saints or All Souls, October 31st, November 1st and 2nd, respectively, share a common tradition. These three festivals concern remembrance of departed souls. On Halloween, as already noted, it's celebrated with games and divination rites, since people once believed spirits of the dead walked abroad on that night. All Saints and All Souls, on the other hand, are popularly observed with souling customs and plays. Originally, these demonstrations were intended to honor the faithful departed and to ease the pain of the bereaved. Souling or soul caking is the custom descended from pre-Reformation times of going about on All Saints' Day or All Souls and begging for cakes in remembrance of the dead. The solar singing verses inherited from the remote past are rewarded with soul cakes. Originally, these were buns rich with eggs and milk and spices and saffron. Although the cakes varied a good deal from county to county, they were generally oval or round in shape and rather flat. Once solars of certain villages began their rounds with services in the parish church, the cake house holders were in exchange for prayers for the dead, a charity for the departed. In other words, soul cakes were intended as a breed dole to the community poor. Bonfires to light the souls out of purgatory and the ringing of church bells also characterized old-time observances. So you can see, like I say, the origin of the idolatry of Halloween. And then in the book of Festival Holidays by Margaret Igas, on pages 123 through 25, it talks a little bit more about the traditions of Halloween. It says, harvest festivals come at a time of year when the last warmth of Indian summer is gone and the bleak winds and gray skies begin to appear. It's the time of year when barns are made snug and the last of the apples and vegetables are stored away in bins, and people sit in front of a roaring fire to relax from the long summer's work. In short, it is a rejoicing over Earth's gifts. The custom of holding a festival in the harvest time goes back over 2,000 years. The last day of the year on the old pagan calendar, October 31st, served the triple purpose of bidding goodbye to the summer, welcoming the winter, and remembering the dead. The Irish built tremendous bonfires on hilltops to offer encouragement to the waning sun and to provide a warm welcome for visiting sprites and ghosts that walked about in the night. People of the British Isles had the quaint custom of tossing objects such as stones, vegetables, and nuts into the bonfire to frighten away any spooks that might be near. These symbolic sacrifices were also fortune-telling props, still widely used at Halloween parties today. If a pebble a man flung into the fire at night was no longer visible the following morning, people clucked sympathetically, believing the man wouldn't survive another year. If the nuts tossed by young lovers exploded into flames, then theirs would be quarrelsome marriages and so on. More fearful of spooks and spouses, folks began hollowing out turnips and pumpkins and placing lighted candles inside to scare evil spirits from the house. Why was the result called a jack-o'-lantern? Tradition says that an Irish jack, too wicked for heaven and expelled from hell for playing tricks on the devil, was condemned to walk the earth with a lantern forever. So they called it the jack-o'-lantern. It was the Irish, too, who initiated the trick-or-treat system hundreds of years ago. Groups of Irish farmers would go from house to house soliciting food for the village Halloween festivals in the name of no less a personage than Mac Ola, or ancient god of Irish clergy. Prosperity was promised to cheerful givers and threats made against tight-fisted donors. It was the custom for English children to dress up in each other's clothes, boys donning girls' outfits and vice versa, and wearing masks to go begging from door to door for soul cakes. Surprisingly, Halloween was scarcely observed in the United States until the last half of the 19th century. It is thought the large-scale Irish immigration had much to do with the popularizing of the holiday. Rather than threaten vengeance for youthful Halloween pranks, more and more communities and neighborhoods have been forestalling them with organized treasure hunts, block parties, and other forms of entertainment. Just the same, any prudent person on Halloween will see that his car is locked in the garage, porch furniture is stowed away, and there are plenty of treats in the form of apples, candies, and pennies to hand out when the doorbell rings and the children shout, "Anything for goblins?" And then in the book of Holidays, On page 149 through 153, it says this about Halloween. Halloween, in spite of the fact that it takes its name from a Christian festival, All Hallows or Saints' Day, comes from pagan times and has never taken on a Christian significance. There were two different festivals in the early world at this time of year, and they were both represented in our Halloween activities. When you duck for apples or throw an apple paring over your shoulder to see what initial it makes on the floor, you are doing as the Romans did. You're honoring Pomona, the Roman goddess of orchards, and especially of apple orchards. And when you light a candle inside of a jeering pumpkin face, you are in a small way imitating the Celtic Druids of northern Britain, described in the chapter on St. Patrick's Day, who lit a fire to scare away winter and the evil spirits who were waiting to come rushing in when summer was over. It also says on that night between October and November, the Druids kindled great fires on the hills as a barrier against evil to come. These Halloween fires still burn every year in many places, but especially in Scotland and Wales. By waving burning wisps of plaited straw aloft on pitchforks, people tried to frighten off demons and witches, but just in case this didn't work, they also put on grotesque and terrifying costumes. For if you dressed in a horrible enough fashion and went trooping around with the spirits all night, they would think you were often one of them and would do you no harm. This is where the persistent Halloween costume of dressing up and wearing masks originated. And among the children who come to the door on Halloween calling trick or treat, the most alarming costumes are still considered the best. On northern peoples in the Germanic and Scandinavian countries also lived in terror of the raging rout, as they called the evil spirits, whom they believed to be led by the great god Odin. Halloween weather was of the greatest importance for these people, for the day was prophetic. If the rout came in on a soft wind, the next year would be easy and good. But if the rout came raging in, the year would be full of bitter woe and warfare. The night being so filled with the supernatural powers, it was usually possible for individuals to catch some premonitions of their own future. Especially among the Celts, there was a custom, which still continues, to try to learn what the future holds, especially in the matrimonial matters. There is a wistful line in an old Scottish song that says, "But I don't know whom I'll marry." Well, Halloween is the time to find out, and if you can't get some kind of a hint at least, you must have no Celtic blood at all. There are so many ways that there should be one for everybody, it says. For instance, a girl puts 3 nuts on a grate, and then she names 1 nut for herself, 2 for possible husbands of her acquaintance. He who cracks or jumps will be unfaithful, but he who starts to burn really likes her and will be a good mate. If the girl's nut and one of the others burnt together, then the wedding is certain. Also, there's an interesting method of looking into a mirror, but of course a girl must be eating an apple while doing it. Then, if she gets a sight or sees a boy peeping over her shoulder, the boy she sees will be the one she will marry. And then there's also 3 luggies, or dishes, it says, which Robert Burns mentions in his poem Halloween. This is for boys instead of girls. 1 dish holds clean water, 1 dirty water, and 1 is empty. The boy is then blindfolded and dips his fingers into the first dish he feels. If you have clean water, you can guess, means he will wed a maiden. Dirty water will be a widow. And if the dish is empty, he stays single. Boys being never so eager to marry as girls are, the empty dish is probably a great relief to them. It says, nuts and apples were invariable attendants upon the Halloween feast, both then and now. And in fact, in the north of England, Halloween is often called Nutcrack Night, and in Penzance and St. Ives in Cornwall, the Saturday nearest Halloween is known as Allen Day, for after the big red apples of the region. apples from ancient orchards, which have supplied many generations of Halloween believers. Trick or treat means, of course, that the young Halloween visitors who come to your door will play no tricks on you if you will treat them. Ask them in for cookies or cider, maybe, or help them fill their bags with fruit, nuts, candy, cake, or anything else that you might like. But in the earlier days of our American Halloween, it says before tricks and treats were popular, on the night of October 31st, it was a nervous time for house owners. People who had such things as bird baths, gates, and lawn chairs learned to stow them away somewhere before dusk arrived, and the raging rout of children dressed as demons and ghosts and witches started to lug away and hide every movable thing they could find. That mischief making is also almost entirely over, and the evil spirits are turned into just a lot of friendly neighborhood children by the ancient Halloween magic of apples and nuts and general merriment. We wish the Druids and the Romans and the Norse could have found such a simple way out, it says. So when you start to study the origins, of the customs of the Christian religion, you start to come to the conclusion that basically pagan worship has not gone away. Because the strongest of pagan religions were just basically incorporated into modern Christianity. In the book Strange Stories and Amazing Facts, written in 1980 in the Reader's Digest, if you've ever read the Reader's Digest, it corroborates this. It says this: Christmas and Easter, although the greatest festivals in the Christian calendar, are celebrated with customs that originated in superstition and heathen rites, hundreds of years before Christ was born. Even the dates owe more to pagan practices than to the birth and resurrection of Jesus. It was not until the 4th century that December 25th was fixed arbitrarily as the anniversary of the Nativity, because the pagan festivals from which so many Christian customs spring were held around that time. And Easter, still a movable feast, despite much pressure to allot it to a specific date, falls according to the phase of the moon that the pagans long ago decided was the appropriate time to venerate their gods. And although Christianity has swept the world in a relatively short time as the histories of great religions go, the early missionaries faced an uphill task. The pagans were reluctant to give up their false gods and their pagan practices. So the missionaries, unable to convert them easily to an entirely new code of worship, did the next best thing. They took the pagan festivals as they were and gradually grafted the observances of the new faith onto the festivals and the rites and customs that surrounded them. December 25th was not called Christmas until the 9th century. Until then, it had been a midwinter feast, a combination of Norse rule festivals and the Roman Saturnalia, both of which took place in late December. Like Christmas and Easter, the festival of Halloween originated in a pagan celebration, even though its name derives from the Christian festival of All Hallows or All Saints' Eve. It was introduced in the 7th century to commemorate all those saints and martyrs who had no special day to themselves and was held on May 13th. But in the 8th century, All Hallows' Day was moved to November 1st to counteract the pagan celebrations held on that date. October 31st, the eve of November 1st, was the last night of the year in the ancient Celtic calendar and was celebrated as the end of summer and its fruitfulness. It was a festival that the Celts of Northern Europe marked with bonfires to help the sun through the winter. Winter also was called to mind in the chill and blackness of the grave. And so it was a time when ghosts would walk and supernatural spirits, warlocks, and witches would hold their revels. Only since the 18th and 19th centuries has Halloween developed into a festive time for children with costumes, lanterns, and games. Before then, it was regarded as a night of fear, and wise men, respectful of hobgoblins and wandering demons, stayed indoors. In the 17th and 18th centuries, however, it was customary for geysers, meaning people in weird masks and costumes, to go from house to house singing and dancing to keep evil at bay, or to go about as representations of the ghosts and goblins of the night. Trick or treat has survived in many parts of the world, it says, as a children's masquerade. In the United States, costumed children go from door to door in a ritual known as trick or treat. They usually carry a sack and threaten to play a trick on the householders if they're not given a treat. And the Halloween lantern, made from the hollowed out pumpkin or turnip with a candle in it, is a relic from the days when food offerings were made to the spirits of the dead and to ward off demons. And I'm bringing that up, friends, because if you are a worshiper of the Holy One, if you believe in the Almighty, He tells us in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 31, it says, "Do not turn to mediums or familiar spirits. Do not seek after them to be defiled by them. I am Yahweh." And then in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 6, he says, "And the person who turns to mediums and familiar spirits to prostitute himself with them, I will set my face against that person and cut him off from his people." And then in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 10 and 11, it says this, "Let there not be found among you one who sacrifices his son or his daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, who interprets omens, or engages in witchcraft, casting spells, or who consults familiar spirits, or a wizard or a necromancer." All of these things were forbidden. And so the tradition of Halloween basically is steeped in all of the abominations that Yahweh told us not to go after. Whoring after, he said. Consulting with these abominations and celebrating them is basically an abomination. And it's really the worship of demons and not Yahweh. Why do I say that? We'll go to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 20 through 22, and read what Shaul, or Apostle Paul, said. He said, "But I say, the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to Yahweh. And I do not want you to have fellowship with demons. You cannot drink the cup of Yahweh and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of Yahweh's table and the table of demons." He says, "Do we provoke Yahweh to jealousy? Are we stronger than He?" So, all of the children of Israel who had turned away from Yahweh to serve Baal Peor, or Lord of the Opening, and decided to eat the sacrifices of the dead, as you read in Numbers chapter 25, they all died. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 3, it says, "Your eyes have seen what Yahweh did to Baal Peor. For all the men who followed Baal Peor, Lord of the Opening, Yahweh your Mighty One destroyed them from among you." So all these customs, pagan celebrations called Halloween, basically is sin against the Almighty. It originated in Baal worship. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 1 through 2, it says this, "Hear, O Israel, the statutes and the judgments which I teach you to observe and do, that you may live and may go in and possess the land which Yahweh, your mighty one, the mighty one of your fathers, is giving you. You shall not add to the word which I command you, nor shall you take anything from it, so that you may keep the commandments of Yahweh your mighty one, which I command you." And so you see is saying, do not add to the word. Take nothing from his word. And we realize, a lot of Halloween articles appear in different newspapers around the United States. But in each article, the conclusion is basically somehow all this pagan worship is now acceptable to the Almighty. And since it's now just fun and there's no harm in it, then there's no harm in reenacting the traditions. But, remember the old saying, a rose by any other name is still a rose? Well, paganism by any other name is still paganism, people. So, if you know these traditions and customs are pagan in origin, and if you still participate in them, you still practice them, it's actually worse than not knowing. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 26, it says, "For if we sin willfully after we have received the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sin." Remember Apostle Shaul, Paul, when he went to Mars Hill and he saw all the worship of all the different gods, and he said, "I can see that you are very religious and strict in your religion," but he said, "Times of ignorance Yahweh has winked at, but now he calls all men to repentance." So you got all these worldly preachers out here, preachers of what I call churchianity, claiming that they follow the scripture, and they claim that they condemn pagan practices. But at the same time, they don't want to rock the boat because they want the money to keep rolling in. But they can't validate what they're doing by Scripture. If you look in the Holy Scriptures, all the way from Genesis to Revelation, the Almighty warns us and tells us to stop participating in the pagan ways and not to learn the ways of the heathen and the nations. Revelation 18 verse 4 says this, "And I heard another voice from heaven saying, 'Come out of her, my people, so that you do not partake in her sins, and so that you do not receive of her plagues.'" And the Almighty also commanded us not to add to His Torah and not to take away from His Torah. Deuteronomy 4:2, "You shall not add to the word which I command you, nor shall you take anything from it, so that you may keep the commandments of Yahweh your mighty one which I command you." And then Revelation 22:14, it says, "Blessed are those who do His commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life and may enter in through the gates into the city." So there really is no blessing from the Holy One for practicing pagan worship. But He does, announce a lot of curses that will come to you for doing so, for turning away from Almighty Yahweh and worshiping idols, worshiping paganism, going in the way of the nations. Deuteronomy chapter 28, you can read it, 16, verses 16 through 68. But it's weird and it's ironic because if you look, most preachers of today, they condemn the laws of Yahweh, but then they condone the pagan traditions. Woe to those who call evil righteous and righteousness evil, right? Who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. But Apostle Paul in Romans 6:16 says this. He says, "Do you not know that to whom you yield yourselves as servants to obey, His servants you are to whom you obey, whether of sin, which leads unto death, or of obedience, which leads unto righteousness?" So, the Messiah, Yahshua HaMashiach, He warned us over and over again about false prophets, about false preachers who would come and who would actually teach against the Torah of Yahweh while they're serving Satan. And He said, "You'll know them by their fruits." If you look in the book of Matthew, chapter 7, verse 16 through 20, He says this. This is what the Messiah says. He says, "You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorns or figs from thistles? Likewise, every righteous tree brings forth righteous fruit, but a tree of evil brings forth fruit of iniquity. A righteous tree cannot bring forth fruit of iniquity, nor can a tree of evil bring forth fruits of righteousness. Every tree which does not bring forth righteous fruit is cut down and is cast into the fire. Therefore, by their fruits will you know them." So, why would you want to listen to false preachers who teach paganism, who preach idolatry? Why would you want to listen to ministers and preachers who teach Baal worship, the ways of the Lord? Because Baal in Hebrew literally means in English, the Lord. It's condemned by Almighty Yahweh. And so tonight I wanted to just go over that because tonight is the night of Samhain, Halloween, where many who proclaim to be Christians are following the ways of idolatry, the ways of ancient paganism, the ways of Babylon. And so if you would want to serve Almighty Yahweh, you must come out of her, my people, and touch not the unclean thing. Eliyahu, the prophet, the Navi, said, how long will you be halt or stuck between two opinions or two doctrines? If Yahweh is your mighty one, serve him. But if Baal is your mighty one, then serve him. You can't serve both. So for Sixth Emperor Tyrannus News, I'm Mark Matheny saying, come out of her, my people. Come out of Babylon. Come into the righteous ways of Almighty Yahweh. Study his word, learn of his Torah. And as Yahshua said, take his yoke upon you. For his yoke is easy and his burden is light. For the commandments of Yahweh are not grievous, Apostle John said. This is the love of Yahweh, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not grievous. They're not a burden. Take care of yourself.